Now, it was disclosed this week that the Crown Prosecution Service conducted meetings with campaigning groups Mermaids and Stonewall before recommending an approach to sex by deception at prosecutions, which would see them all but vanish. The Information Commissioner's Office upheld an appeal against the refusal of the CPS to name who they consulted on the deception as to gender section in the Rape and Serious Sexual Offences Legal Guide. The Information Commissioner said the public interest favoured disclosure of the information. Now, here to explain the significance of this, I'm joined by Dennis Kavanagh, lawyer and director of the Gay Men's Network. Hello, Dennis.
Hi. Hello.
So, firstly, could you explain to us why this consultation is controversial?
It's controversial because what happened was the CPS announced a radically new model policy to the prosecution of sex by deception. If I back up for a moment, sex by deception is a situation where someone lies about their biological sex. These cases are quite unusual, but they're very important and very serious because they often feature people who are very sexually naive.
Young people, that kind of...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Often very young, sometimes people who have specific vulnerabilities that render them naive. And lo and behold, at the end of 2022, we got a consultation through, and I discussed it with you in the past. It's the first CPS consultation I've ever seen in my life that finds reasons not to prosecute. It was extraordinary. It told prosecution staff that gender identity was not only real, but that if a defendant said that they had a gender identity, and the CPS lawyer found it convincing, in the words of the consultation, if they were living as a man, living as a woman, well, then they shouldn't be prosecuted. Even worse, it said you shouldn't prosecute where someone had closed their eyes to the obvious. And when you think that these are vulnerable and naive people, that's victim blaming from the CPS.
Yes.
And now we only know, we were all very, very concerned about this sort of language. These are serious cases. The Court of Appeal has said that they're serious cases. It's said that deceptions as to your biological sex is a serious, serious offence against someone else. It's a serious lie to tell. We thought this had the grubby fingerprints all over it of the extreme gender identity lobby.
Yes.
At the time, and many of us, when we responded, said we thought the CPS was subject to what's called institutional capture, which is where extreme gender ideologues get in and corrupt a system. Now, a very intrepid Twitter user to whom we're very much indebted to, I wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for her hard work, called her Twitter handle is Jill, submitted a Freedom of Information request and pursued this because she asked, CPS said, look, we have met with interested groups. And she simply said, well, you're a public service, freedom of information, who are the interested groups?
Well, this is where it gets interesting, because the Crown Prosecution Service refused to answer that simple question, and they delayed and they delayed and they appealed, and then they were told that the appeal wouldn't stand. They said, but we got there in the end, right?
We did, but only thanks to Jill's tenacity and doggedness. She has submitted the Freedom of Information request on the 26th of September of 2022. We've only just had the appeal withdrawn on the 16th of January this year under a new Director of Public Prosecutions, which I suspect had something to do with it. But we learnt quite a lot in this backwards and forwards. One of the most striking things was when the CPS were arguing with the Information Commissioner about whether or not they should have to tell us who they met with, one of the things they said is we shouldn't have to tell you because if these organisations, quote, making their participation public would almost certainly cause an issue for them. This is the CPS saying it would cause them an issue. And then they went, it gets worse. They said they may be obliged to set out their position on the issues in public. So that's the...
Shock horror.
I know, that's the CPS saying to us, or saying to Jill, that a public service shouldn't tell us who they're talking to about the decision about who does and doesn't get prosecuted for rape. It's extraordinary.
I mean, I don't want to read anyone's minds, but it sounds very much like they didn't want us to know that they'd met with these lobby groups.
It does. I mean, you could be forgiven for thinking that, couldn't you? It is extraordinary. They also said we can't name these groups because they'll, quote, be drawn into controversy. This is appalling. The CPS know that these positions are controversial, right?
Yes.
They know that they don't want to defend them in public. And what they're doing is they're running cover for these people. This is outrageous. This is rape prosecution policy, and they're having secret meetings with extremists and then covering from them.
Can you explain to me why, for a consultation on prosecutorial policy regarding rape, you have to talk to a children's charity?
I wish I could answer that question. It's just extraordinary. Mermaids are a very controversial child sex change charity who are now under a safeguarding investigation for very serious allegations. Stonewall have been campaigning to decriminalise sex by deception since Ruth Hunt, the CEO, one but before the last one,
yes,
was in charge. They also spoke to the Scottish Trans Alliance, despite the fact that this is a prosecution policy for England and Wales. It does rather look like there's a very cosy arrangement here between an elite, both in the public sector, in the CPS, and in the charity sector, who all seem to have one view. And they want to have secret meetings. They want to change prosecution policy, change it so that we have second-class defendants for, as I say, these often very vulnerable, very naive people. They want them to be second-class victims, and they want privileged status for their preferred set of defendants. This is extraordinary, and the new DPP badly needs to get a handle on this. We still have no idea what was said round the table by Stonewall and Mermaids. Now, you compare that, I can tell you, if you want to know what the Gay Men's Network said in this consultation, or Sex Matters, or LGB Alliance, who Mermaids were trying to close down at the time, or Transgender Trend, you can look up all our responses online. Why should these be secret? So I would call upon the new Director of Public Prosecutions, please, to publish and tell us what Stonewall are saying and what Mermaids are saying behind closed doors. We have a right to know. This is a public service.
But don't we already know, insofar as we've seen the Crown Prosecution Service use phrases that imply that gender identity is an indisputable fact, when, of course, it is a quasi-religious belief system? If the Crown Prosecution Service is taking that view, then how can they possibly be considered impartial?
Well, quite. And, you know, when you read the consultation, there is an uncritical adoption of the ideological language of gender. They talk about some people being genderqueer, sex being assigned at birth, the lot. There's even criticism of the fact that you can't get a gender recognition certificate to be non-binary. There's comments in the consultation about gender identity services, healthcare for children, which is way outside what we call RASO, rape and serious sexual offences policy. It's institutional capture. The DPP needs to get a hold of this, because we can't have confidence in an ideologically captured public service that's supposed to be independent. And also, I question how employees of the Crown Prosecution Service, there's plenty of sensible employees, would ever be able to operate this policy. Because if you don't believe in gender identity, I don't see how you could.
Isn't this a broader problem, though? Because we've seen many cases of the police showing clear signs of institutional capture. If it's in the police, if it's in the courts, if it's in the CPS, then we're in real trouble, aren't we?
We are in real trouble. And, you know, there are good signs. Kemi Badenoch stood on the floor of House of Commons and said Stonewall do not make the law in this country. She's right, but it's worth saying they damn well try to.
Yeah, and they're still in many institutions and corporations misrepresenting the law.
Yeah, completely. Well, the law is entirely misrepresented in this consultation. I won't go into the ins and outs of the Crown against McNally and the law of consent, but I can tell you it is just plain wrong. But the fact of the matter is this. We've got people who couldn't win up in the Court of Appeal. They couldn't influence Parliament. Stonewall, before all of this, said they were going to try and influence MP. They obviously decided that wouldn't work, so they've decided instead to go and subvert the law behind closed doors. And haven't we seen this again and again and again? Didn't we see this where Aqua Reindorf described their behaviour, I think it was Reading University, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, as trying to get ahead of the law, and the law as they wished it to be.
That was Reading.
That was Reading. It was rather than the law as it was. And I'm sorry, no one voted for Stonewall. If Stonewall don't make the law in this country, as the Secretary of State for Equality said, then it's damn well time that was the case in terms of the operation of our public services.
So what would you like to see happen now? Would you some sort of statement from the DPP, some sort of investigation, perhaps, something like that?
Well, I'd like to... first, I want to know what on earth is going on with this consultation. It's been kicked into the long grass. We've heard nothing. I want to know what the CPS policy is. Second, I want to know what on earth is being said to the CPS behind closed doors. Third, if we are correct, and this is clear institutional capture, I want to understand why there's been ideological stealth capture of a public service under the watch of the relevant government ministers. And if that has occurred, the Attorney General and the Director of Public Prosecutions need to sort this out. Rape prosecution policy is too serious to be sacrificed on the altar of gender identity. No, I'm sorry, this far and no further. This is too serious.
And just very finally, say, just to give the other side, my understanding is that very recently Stonewall have updated their website and added a footnote to suggest that they do not, in fact, give legal advice. What do you make of that?
Well, good luck to them. I mean, as one lawyer to another, I always admire an attempt at an exclusion clause. Let's see how that plays out, shall we?
Fantastic. Well, Dennis Kavanagh, thank you so much for joining me.